Hello, and welcome to the Educators and Immigration Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. I immigrated to the United States at a young age and am currently working as an assistant professor of education. In this podcast, we will explore the intersection between various immigration statuses and how that relates to our K-12 educational system. We will explore how educators can support immigrant families, undocumented youth, and students with DACA. Join us to learn more about these topics, listen to our guest stories, and explore resources to support students. This is the Educators and Immigration Podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Educators and Immigration. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla, and I'm really happy to be here with a friend, Jannet Arenas Pineda. Jannet was recognized as the Woman of Distinction by the YWCA of Madison. The awardees are recognized for their community service, professional achievement, integrity, leadership, and dedication to the lives of others and to the quality of life for all, which aligns with YWCA's mission and values. Jannet is a first-generation Mexican immigrant who grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. She is a bilingual community social worker for Dane County Human Services for Joining Forces for Families. Before working for Joining Forces for Families, she was a school social worker at Midvale Elementary School and remains as a member of the MMSD Core Mindfulness Team. Jannet earned her Master's of Social Work with a double major in Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2014. As a former undocumented woman, she is passionate about promoting social justice, collective liberation, and well-being. Jannet, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Lalo. Thanks for having me.
So can we begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and who you are?
Sure. You want the short version, right? I usually start the story about me. I came to the U.S. with my family when I was 9 years old, straight to Madison, Wisconsin, and then I never left. I've been here ever since. I guess now I consider myself a Madisonian, as much as I have a little bit of resistance against that. But I've been here longer than I've been in my home country. So Madison is it's a place that I call home now. Yeah, so a little bit about my story. So I came when I was 9 years old. Back then, I think in Madison, there was not a lot of people that looked like me, really. I remember that there was, if I saw another family that maybe looked like us, I would get really excited and point them out to my family and say, Mom, look, they're like us. So that's just to give you a little context of kind of how it was. And, now the Latino community has grown significantly since then. And so I think for me and my story has grown with it. My journey has taken me through going through the different schools, elementary school, from not speaking any English whatsoever to going to ESL classes, graduating from ESL, going into middle school, high school, even losing some of my Spanish, and then all the struggles post-high school in terms of trying to get my higher education as an undocumented student. And then, moving on from there, a lot of the struggles that come with just being undocumented, and then some of those transitions in my life to having legal status, like a temporary kind of legal status, right, which we would call DACA, and then now being able to have green card. So kind of going through that whole trajectory. That's my whole kind of immigration story. Of course, that is the very short version.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that when we talk about our stories, it's very important to kind of just take a pause and think about like all of those different journeys that we've gone through in each of those. I'm wondering if it's possible to talk a little bit more about, as you were thinking about applying for college, like what was that like being undocumented and being able to figure out what educational journeys might be available or what pathways might be available for you?
Thinking back on that time, I think, going back to like high school, right? I knew what I wanted to do. In my own perspective, I kind of positioned myself to be able to go to college. Education was one of the biggest reasons that my family immigrated to this country. I knew that that was always something that I wanted to do. I just had no idea how to do that. I knew that I didn't have papers. I knew that it was going to be harder. And honestly, I didn't know, I didn't see a path. When I was in high school, I didn't share my status with a lot of people, or I would say I just didn't share my status outside of my family, right? So it was something that I just had no idea, and I had no support. And mostly because the people that I shared my status with was very limited, And so I think even when I was able to be brave enough to share my situation, it was at a point where it was kind of new for people. People didn't really know how to help. And so I think more often than not, the goal for people like me was kind of just to graduate high school. And so for me, my parents didn't go to college, so I knew it was going to be something that I had to figure out on my own. So that in itself was hard. But then just having this other big thing of not having status, knowing I wasn't going to be able to have any financial support, I just had no idea how to do it, really. So I started talking to a few people about it, and they helped me with what they could. But it was really at a point where there just really wasn't that much awareness about the issue, and there was very limited resources.
Well, and as you're sharing your story, I could definitely relate to that idea of, one, being cautious of how many people you share your story with, because you want to protect it. You don't want to let everybody know about it. But also that second part of then the people that were willing to help you not necessarily knowing what were those pathways to even be able to help you. And I could definitely relate to that as well. I would go to my counselor and be like, hey, here's what I'm trying to work with. What can we do? And then being like, well, I actually don't know what will be the next steps. So thank you for sharing that part of it. And I feel like that's, as you said, after a while, then there was more national consciousness, I think, as we think about DACA and the movement that was undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic. Having that movement come forward and be able to bring people's stories out to be able to share some of those.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember, when I was in high school, just kind of feeling like I was alone. I knew other people that were undocumented and other students and peers, but not necessarily ones that wanted to go to college or saw themselves doing that. I did, at that point, kind of, seek out other things online that I saw in movements. And so I kind of started seeing that because, as you mentioned, when I was going through high school, this was pre-DACA, before even DACA was even an idea. Once I graduated and I first started at a community college, then I started kind of hearing these things, right? And seeing other students leading the charges and leading the movements around the country. And so that was really, really exciting for me to see. And not necessarily that I was part of those things, right? Not necessarily that I was ready to share my status or my story with other people or fight the same way that they were, but it was empowering for me to see that there was other people there doing that same fight. There was other people like me, there's other people out there trying to figure it out. And then, as we know now, it was those same people and those same students that eventually got DACA to be a reality.
Well, and the other thing that you mentioned in your stories is the different organizations that are there that were trying to help not only the students in college and higher ed, thinking about how to be successful in higher education and how to move through higher education, but we're also trying to do the intentional reach back to the high schools around the area and be able to work with some of the youth to normalize this conversation. As you mentioned before, going to DACA, it was just important to just be visible and to kind of let people know. And I'm not sure if you want to talk a little bit about Alcance and kind of what that was.
Yeah, so, after high school, I did the best that I could, which was, I knew that community college was going to be the most accessible thing for me. This is at a point where there was no in-state tuition for students in Wisconsin, right? So I knew that was going to be the only choice for me as myself having to pay for college on my own. Even with going to college, I had to work to support my own classes. So I started going to school part-time and just kind of working for the next class. So I just started little by little, and it was hard. But when I was at this community college, then I met other people, other students that wanted to talk to other students that were maybe like us or maybe had other struggles. And basically, we just wanted to get more people out there to help them a lot of us were first generation students. And so we were figuring things out as we were. And because of that, I think we wanted to share what we knew with other students, other high school students. So the path would be a little bit easier for them, essentially, you know? And so there was 5 of us that started organization, basically. And basically the idea was just to share our stories and to see if that would help anybody else that was coming after us. And so we just went and we talked to teachers around the area. We talked to students, different classrooms, different high schools around Dane County and other places. Wherever we got invited, we would go, really. And all we were doing was sharing our own stories, whatever pieces of our story we wanted to share, that's what we would share with them. And people, resources, ideas of things that had helped us. So that's what we did for a while. And I think it was a very grassroots effort. You know, we were just five students, 5 kids really now, when I think about it, that just wanted to do this. And we just got together and we just decided to do it. And we grew and eventually we stopped doing the work. But to this day, I have relationships with some of the younger generation that we spoke to, and they have told us that them hearing our story was powerful for them, you know, and it was impactful for them and inspired them to keep going and not give up.
Well, and it's like thinking about your own story of what narratives you hear or didn't get a chance to hear, to have somebody else come into your classroom and say, here's our story, here's what we could do. It's definitely a way to think about how to share those perspectives and how to have that open communication, both for the teachers as well as for the students, that I feel like it's really, really powerful. And you mentioned the work also shifts as well as you're moving through different areas and different parts of your life. That my particular program might not continue, but the advocacy work and the passion and the support that you've had for that community has always been there. And so kind of like what drives that passion for you? What is the thing that drives your passion to support undocumented and DACA populations?
What drives it is just, I was part of it for so long. You know what I mean? I mean, it was basically like, it wasn't helping others. It was helping myself and my community. And so it was that thinking of nobody is going to come and help us with this. You know, we have to figure it out on our own because that's the only choice that we have. That's the only option. So why not do it together, you know, and why not help the people coming after us so things are easier for them? That was really the thing. And I think even in high school, I knew I wanted to be a social worker. You know, that was always my goal. And I think for me, it was just knowing that I wanted to help people, you know, and I think that really just comes from my own life experiences, you know, the things that I've gone through, the struggles that I've had, and just wanting to make things a little bit easier for other people. Thank
you for sharing that. You mentioned in your story that you were also part of the DACA program. Can you talk a little bit about how having access to DACA impacted your life?
I think there's been some points in my life that are like chapters in a book, right? And there's some chapters that something happens and then your life changes, right? And so DACA was definitely one of them. I think before that, one of the other things that, if you don't mind me going back to, was when in-state tuition for Wisconsin passed. And that was huge for me because, as I had mentioned before, you know, I had been going to school, to community college for a long time. And I was kind of just taking classes as many as I could until it got to the point of having to transfer over to a university, which was my first goal in the first place. But not being able to do that right away and having to take classes at a community college and being involved in some of that struggle and some of that movement around passing in situation for undocumented students at that time. And when it passed, then it allowed me to actually transfer over. And it allowed me to go to UW-Madison with in-state tuition, which was the first time ever, right? So that was a huge part. And that was kind of like a sign, you know, that I was going on the right path. And yes, this path was really hard. And, you know, the path wasn't laid down yet. There was no path, right? And I was kind of just putting things together, hopping along this path. But it was kind of like just a sign that things can change. You know, it was my first, I guess it was just my first sign that things don't have to be a certain way. It was my first sign that laws can change. And so for me, that changed my life because that allowed me to keep going, right? It allowed the path to actually be there. It allowed me to go to the next step in that path. So that was really, really awesome. And then, of course, that eventually got me to be able to graduate and get my bachelor's. My bachelor's took me 7 years to achieve, but if it wasn't for institution in there, it might have never happened. And so after that, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school for my career, and this was pre-DACA. And so I didn't know how I was going to do it. Again, I was trying to figure out how to go to grad school because in-state tuition was revoked.
The new governor came in, and then he basically pulled it out. And so in-state tuition was active from 2010 to 2011. And I think that was when the new governor then came in.
Yeah. So the new governor came in and took it away, essentially, right? So then I knew for grad school, in-state tuition was no longer an option. So I had to take a year off to just kind of figure things out. And again, I didn't really know what that was going to look like. And then DACA happened. So really good timing from the universe, thank you, that when DACA happened and it passed, it was huge. For me, I guess the biggest thing was I knew that I was going to be able to work, which was the only way that I was going to be able to go to grad school and support myself through that. And I think just in general, just knowing that I was protected from deportation was really big. I knew I could actually legally work. I knew I could get a driver's license. All those pieces, while it's not enough, obviously, it was life-changing at that moment.
And so then that happened at that same time. You were able to then go to grad school then and be able to work, and it just opened many opportunities as well, many more doors. As you mentioned, is not the ultimate support that we need. We need to make sure we fight for comprehensive immigration reform as a permanent way of supporting students who are undocumented, but also then thinking about how this one program was able to at least have some doors open at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think DACA was huge for, all the people that were able to get it, but it left so many people out. I think for me, it happened at a really crucial time in my life because then I was able to go to grad school, and I was able to work and all of that. But again, it's temporary, right? And so it's still very stressful to have to be in this temporary spot of not knowing if it's going to get renewed, if it's not, and then later on it becomes this thing that gets attacked all the time. So you're always stressed about it.
And always having to think about what's coming up next and how to prepare for it, not knowing what might happen with it. So you were able to get your legal status adjusted, and then you actually went into the career of social work. And so can you talk to us a little bit about what that career was like for you being a social worker?
Yeah, so it was thanks to DACA that I was able to work as a social worker after I graduated from grad school. And to me, that was huge. It was this thing of being a school social worker was my goal since I was in high school, basically. And after the 7 years of my bachelor's and then another 2 to get my master's degree, I was able to finally get that job. And so for me, it was huge to be able to get that. And it's a really hard job. It's a very rewarding job, but it's also very hard. So I think for me, I just felt so grateful that I was able to not only have a job, a job that I could legally work in, but also a career and in something that I wanted to do and something that I've been wanting to do for a long time and something that I thought was very important, because now I'm able to help students that maybe were going through hard times in their lives, to help families, to help educators. It was what I wanted to be doing.
And as you mentioned, that was one way of helping the people in the community. You're also very passionate about wellness and mindfulness. And so we mentioned in the intro that you're part of the MMSD Core Mindfulness Program. Can you talk a little bit about how wellness and mindfulness is important, specifically for the undocumented population first?
Being undocumented, for me, it was always about striving. It was always about trying hard. It was always about survival, really. And if you think about not feeling safe, having to fight for the little crumbs that the society gives you, I think all of that is really, you're talking about toxic stress. And so I think for me, this topic of wellness and later on mindfulness, was something that I wish I would have found earlier as a student. Thankfully, I was able to find it later on in the beginning of my school social worker career, and that was really great. Because as I said, my job was stressful, and I think supporting people that are going through a hard time, there's vicarious trauma. And if you don't prioritize your own wellness, if you don't prioritize your own well-being, it's going to have a negative effect on you. So for me, I was able to find that through MMSG. I just started by going to a mindfulness class, that they were offering once. And I remember it just being so weird, so unfamiliar, it was like, what? We're supposed to just sit here and just do nothing? That was so strange to me, you know what I mean? Because immigrants, we don't just sit, we work hard, we strive, we do one thing, we do more things, we do all the things. So I think it was in conflict with a lot of the messaging that I got growing up. And then it was also in conflict with the reality that I faced as an undocumented person in this country. So I had to really navigate through that of this is really weird, but it's also really important. And these are the reasons why. And some of those reasons are because if I take care of myself, I can take care of others better. But also, I also deserve to just be better. I also deserve to be well. And so I think that for me, mindfulness became a way to be well, but there's a lot of other things too. So being part of the mindfulness team essentially was a way for me to learn more, to practice more, and to be able to offer what I learned to other professionals, to other teachers, right? It was a way that I could support the learning and the well-being of staff in the district. So my participation really has been supporting professional development for teachers in the district and mostly courses in Spanish, which I think for me that was really important, to be able to explore whatever your idea of mindfulness and wellness is in Spanish. That was really important.
And thinking about the language access too as a service that is, you mentioned potentially not being exposed to it, but also adding the language as an access point and why that was so important to also have.
I think for teachers, for educators, to take care of the students as it should, but there's not enough opportunities for teachers to take care of themselves. And so part of the mindfulness offerings in the district is to be able to kind of turn that around and really focus on teacher resilience, right? Because we know that if teachers are well, the students are going to be better. You know what I mean? If a teacher is stressed, if an adult is stressed, that child that is with that adult, that child that is with that teacher, they're going to feel it. They're going to notice it, and it's going to impact them too. So it's a way for them to get that support and for them to increase their resilience.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that you mentioned was about the importance of wellness for undocumented population. As we think about mental health as well as another area of support, what are some things about mental health that you think is important to kind of keep in mind? The thought that's coming to my head is you mentioned not knowing about wellness till grad school. What can we educators do to support the mental health of students who are undocumented and all students in general as we think about mental health needs?
For educators and staff and anybody that wants to support undocumented populations, it's important to kind of just understand the context and understand where people are coming from. Like I said before, I think being undocumented makes it really easy for you to feel stressed, or at least it did for me. I think oppression makes it really hard for people to think about being well. We're just stuck on this survival because of the circumstances that we're stuck in. And so I think any opportunities, anything that teachers can support in terms of spaces where things like this could be talked about, right? Any supports. I think being undocumented, there are things that you don't have access to. So I think for me, especially when I was undocumented, I didn't have access to a therapist, but I was able to find support in peers, for example, right? And even just being able to share my story with somebody else and feeling heard is really important, you know? So I think for me, finding those informal support structures, whether that's through a peer, through a friend, groups that are working on things. I think just even being part of groups or movements that are working towards justice and working towards liberation and working to do something about the circumstances, that in itself can be really supportive, you know, because then you don't feel as stuck. You don't feel as alone. You know that there's other people there fighting for the same thing or for similar things. And you don't have to do it all, you know, even if you get to a point where you need to take a break, you know that there's other people there. So I think that was really important. As teachers and staff, what they can do is, you know, educate themselves, being aware of the issues, being aware of the context of what's happening, knowing that there are things going on in the political climate that could be impacting your students, that there's all these structural barriers to them even just showing up, being in front of you, that there's a lot the students are carrying with them every day. So if you can provide a space where they feel safe enough to share with you, then really treasure that, because it's hard to share with someone else and to trust them to be able to let them in. You can be that space for somebody, you know, you can provide that support. And I've had so many people throughout my educational journey that were so supportive to me. And that's really what got me by, you know. It was all the people that sat with me, that listened to me. Didn't matter if they knew how to get me help or not. It was just, I knew that they were understanding and I knew that they wanted to help. I knew that they would help if they could, and I knew that they were there to cheer me on.
So one of the things that I hear you saying was talking about being present and being available for you in terms of creating that space as you were going through the journey to create that space. One of the things that I just realized we went over was this idea of you adjusting your status. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share part of that journey after you had DACA. What was that like to then go from having DACA to adjusting your status?
So I was able to have DACA. I renewed it a couple times, maybe 3, I don't remember. You know, you have to review it every 2 years. So it becomes this thing, almost like, you know, doing your taxes. So you have to just do it a lot every year, and then you have to spend money on it and all this paperwork. But I explored ways to adjust my status, but there's no line really for people to go stand behind. There was no line for me to go stand behind and say, okay, I'm ready now. You know, I went to school, I have my master's degree, I'm ready to have a legal status. There's nothing for me to do that. And so I was just kind of in this limbo, right? I was DACA and that's all I had. And I was able to finally adjust my status when I got married. And that was the only way I could do it. I came here when I was 9. I wasn't able to find a way to adjust my status until I was in my 30s. And the only way that happened was because I got married to a citizen. And so that's a big problem. That's really sad that that's the only way that it happened. Having fought for immigration rights since I was in college, since I was, 18, and seeing some things happen, like institution pass, but then it was taken away. DACA pass, but then being attacked all the time. It's kind of sad that that's the only way that I was able to finally adjust my status. And don't get me wrong, I am very grateful. And it's something that people don't have access to. And I will take it. I think it just speaks to the importance of continuing to fight for immigration rights, because it shouldn't be that the only way you can adjust your status is through marriage. That shouldn't be the case. There should be a pathway to citizenship for everyone, and not just people that go to college, not just people that get their master's degree, not just people like me. It should be available to people that are here working and doing the best that they can and that have no other way.
Well, and what you're talking about is also the broken immigration system. And the reason why people are frustrated with it is because, as you mentioned, there's no line to get behind. I remember in 2001, my family, we petitioned for myself, be petitioned by another permanent resident. And so my priority date would have been 2001. This past year, I went back to the visa bulletin to kind of see where would I have been if I would have continued that same petition, and they're still working in 1999. And so we're in the year 2021, and they're still working in 1999. My priority date would have been 2001. So even today, I wouldn't have been able to go up to the court to decide whether or not I would have a adjustment of status in that point. And you mentioned family is one of the pathways. The other one usually is employment, and then there's one or two other ones, but they're very, very limited. And even those pathways have so many restrictions on what counts and what doesn't count. If you're married, how long you have to be married, where you were married, and then sometimes people are asked to leave the United States in order to do the interview as well. It's just such a complicated issue or system that it just makes it so much harder. And I also was undocumented for over 20 years before I was able to find my pathway as well. So we've talked a little bit about what some of the challenges are that you kind of face growing up and going through sharing your story. Are there other challenges that you have seen as we think about today, and what are the current challenges that DACA students, undocumented students face, or people with visas face?
There's a lot of things. I think access is one of the things that I think about the most, right? What kinds of things you have access to, depending on where you are in that spectrum, from undocumented to documented to whatever visa you have to green card. It's like you have different access depending where you are on that spectrum. And access to everything, basically, right? It's access in terms of resources for health, resources for school, resources for jobs. It impacts all aspects of your life. I think other challenges are just the stress from uncertainty and stress from not knowing what's going to happen next, right? The stress from maybe not being seen in certain places, right? Or not being thought of, or actually being intentionally excluded from a lot of places, not feeling safe, knowing that your status is a reason why you could be separated from your family at any point. A lot of hardship that comes from not being able to be with family members that were left behind, family members that went back, family members that got sent back, whatever that is. A lot of hardship from not being able to visit your family in your home country. That's really hard. I think also, depending on the political climate, immigrants they're scapegoat to a lot of these problems in society that people want to point to as immigrants being the cause of, and we know it's not true, and we know that it's just an easy target for people, right? And so I think racism, and discrimination for being who you are, that takes a toll on you. Knowing that there's a lot of people out there that are understanding and they are aware of the situation and the historical and current context for immigration and reasons around it, but there's also a lot of people that don't understand and don't care to understand, and they'd rather just blame you or people like you for their own problems.
So what resources have you found that have been useful in supporting students as they go through their educational journeys?
I was a student a while ago, Lalo, so I don't have the current situation and how things are right now. But I think kind of what I talked about before, the resources that I found when I was going through my educational journey were people, right? People that knew or wanted to know what it was like for me, wanted to support me. It was educators that took the time to educate themselves and provide that space to me, to support me, to advocate for me, And other resources were just other peers, student groups or just other advocacy groups that were fighting for different things, immigrant rights, in terms of just feeling like I could do something to change the current situation, if not for myself, but for other people. So that was really helpful to be part of movements. and just finding allies, in the system. People that even if they can't change the way things are, in terms of policy or practice, they might be able to ask questions about why something is the way it is and maybe influence someone else to change those down the line. So I think those are resources that I think I would say to people, just it's important to find those people for yourself. For me, that was really important, and I wouldn't have gotten as far as I did without finding peers, without finding educators, without finding allies that were there to help me through my whole journey.
Thank you. What advice would you have for undocumented youth and students?
I don't know if I have advice for undocumented youth and students. I have advice for my younger self, Lalo, that I can share with you now, if you want.
Yes, please.
What I'll say about the undocumented youth and students now, this generation, I feel like I'm old school now, right? I was a student for a long time, but I haven't been for a while now. So what I think is exciting to see in what I've noticed of undocumented youth and students, especially people coming after me, is that they seem strong. They seem empowered. They seem brave. Like they are getting things done. I feel like they got to grow up in a world that had a little bit more consciousness and awareness around this issue. And so that they were able to ask for what they deserve. And I've just seen a lot of positive changes. When I talk to undocumented youth and students now, I get to hear about the things that they have access to, right? I get to hear about different scholarships or different programs, different centers. And that just makes me so happy, because a lot of the stuff wasn't around when I was going through school. But everything that I did, I was doing in hopes that things would be easier for them. And so I just feel like they don't need my advice. They got it. They really don't need my advice. They're doing it all, and I feel really proud.
Thank you. You mentioned that you have a letter that you wrote to your younger self.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing?
All right, I'll try to get through this. This is a letter that I wrote to myself, to my younger self as an undocumented student. I know that you are tired. I know that it is hard. It is okay to rest. I know some days it just seems impossible, but there are people that have never even met you that are out there fighting for you. I know the people that are supposed to help you do not know how, but you asking them for help is important. It will make it more likely that they will be able to help the next person. I know that being first takes its toll. Give yourself time and space to recover. Don't take it out on yourself or your loved ones. I know it feels like you snuck in here, but you deserve to be here. They will try to push you out, but you won't let them. I know that you are lonely, but you are not alone. The more people you let in and trust, the more support you are gathering for yourself. Your peers won't understand your story if you never share it. You will meet others with similar struggles and become friends. You will celebrate the movement's wins. You will receive help without asking because people believe in you. You will get the degrees and job you wanted. One day, you will have those 9 numbers and life will be easier. One day, you will be welcomed home again. One day, you will hug your loved ones again. One day, you will share your story on your own terms.
Thank you for sharing that powerful letter to your younger self. And thank you for being with us today. I've really appreciated our conversation and you sharing your story with our audience. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing who you are and the work that you do, the passion, the commitment, and tirelessly working for immigrant and undocumented rights.
Thanks, Lalo.
And thank you to everybody for listening as well. This has been the Educators and Immigration Podcast. Please remember to share, like, and subscribe. If you have Apple Podcasts, please remember to leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. And we will see you again in our next episode. Thank you and have a great day.